자, 10시가 되었습니다, 여러분. 반갑습니다. 안녕하세요. 안녕하세요, 여러분. 오늘 어마어마합니다. 네. 오늘 제가 꼭 유튜버 하는 것 같아요. 와, 네. 사람들 계속 들어오네요, 지금. 어마어마합니다, 지금. 예. 전 너무 놀래가지고, 네. 자, 오늘 데보션 테크 세미나, 4월 테크 세미나 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 반갑습니다, 여러분. 다시 한번. 제가 시간이 없어요. 한 5분만 빨리 하고, 강사님 모셔야 될 것 같아요. 예, 다룰 내용이 너무 많아가지고요. 오늘 챗 GPT, 새로운 패러다임. 그죠? 이게 저희 거의 개발 쪽도 그렇고 많이 바꿨죠. 지금 문화를 바꿔가고 있죠. 챗 GPT로 인해서 나오는 새로운 패러다임에 대해서 알아보는 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. SK에서 오신 분들, 여기 테크 세미나 자주 오시는 분들 많이 보이는데요. 채팅창 통해서 지금 출석 체크 해주고 계시거든요. 이렇게 해주시면은 좋을 것 같습니다. 네. 그리고 오늘은 줌 웹비나로 진행을 하고 있어서, 이제 여러분들이 이제 보이진 않으시고 세미나 전용 모드입니다. 그래서 Q&A를 여기 줌에 있는 기능을 이용해서 Q&A를 올려주시면 이따가 발표 끝나고 강사님들 답변 들을 수 있게 또 진행 도와드리겠습니다. 네. 자, 광고 잠깐 하겠습니다. 저희가 진행하다 보니까. 데보션 앱 혹시 설치 안 하신 분 계신가요? 오늘 여기 들어오신 분들 중에. 빨리, 빨리. 여기 QR 있죠? 예. QR 이렇게 하시면은 이제 앱 설치로 연결이 될 텐데요. 저희 데보션 앱에서는 블로그뿐만 아니라 외부 개발자들하고 소통을 하기 위해서 커뮤니티 기능을 만들어 놨습니다. 그래서 이 커뮤니티에서 다양한 주제로 여러분들하고 대화를 나눌 수가 있거든요. 소통하자는 거죠, 저는. 그래서 뭐 일상이라든지 뭐 뉴스라든지 뭐 리뷰라든지 이런 것들 같이 운영을 하고 있거든요. 그래서 편하게 글을 남겨주시면 제가 되게 댓글도 많이 달아드리고 여러분들랑 소통할 수 있게 하고 있거든요. 그래서 이 앱 출시했고 앱 안에 커뮤니티 기능을 좀 활용을 잘 했으면 좋겠어요. 지하철에서 이렇게 막 보면 저는 계속 보거든요. 그래서 이거 좀 부탁드립니다. 다운로드. 이게 앱을 출시를 한 지 한 4개월째 됐는데 다운로드 기록이 이렇게 별로 안 돼가지고 제가 계속 광고를 이렇게 드리고 있어요. 네. 그리고 이제 또 앱에 또 이벤트로 저희가 이 QR 인증 배지를 드려요. 오늘 테크 세미나 4월에 오늘 오신 분들한테만 드리는 배지예요. 그래서 여기 사자가 딱 보이죠? 사자. 그래서 요 QR 인증하시면 데보션 앱에서 참여 인증 배지가 발급이 되고요. 이 발급과 동시에 그럼요. 모두 받을 수 있어요. 유데미 분들도, 유데미에서 오신 분들도 앱 설치하시면 이 인증을 통해서 나중에 마일리지 50점을 받을 수 있고요. 마일리지는 나중에 저희 스타벅스 기프트콘, 키보드, 마우스 이런 걸로 교환하실 수 있게 저희가 지원하고 있거든요. 그래서 이거 금방 모으더라고요. 뭐한 3, 4개월 정도 꾸준하게 활동하시면 받아가실 수 있는 마일리지 상품이 많이 있습니다. 그리고 오늘 세미나 듣고 후기를 저희 아까 커뮤니티 쪽에다가 이렇게 태그 이렇게 세미나 후기라는 기술 태그로 남겨주시면 마일리지 50점을 또 드려요. 그러니까 100점을 받을 수 있는 겁니다. 어마어마하죠? 네. 200점이 10,000원짜리 기프트콘으로 바꿀 수 있어요. 네. 갑자기 솔깃하시죠? 그래서 혹시 아직 설치 안 하시거나 요 인증 배지 받아가실 분들은 지금 화면 캡처를 하시던지 화면 캡처를 딱 하셔도 되고 그래가지고 나중에 꼭 받아가세요. 인증 배지 오늘 일자가 지나면 제가 이제 막을 거거든요. 그래서 오늘 딱 참여하신 온라인으로 참석하신 분들만 위해서 인증 배지를 제공해 드리겠습니다. 네. 자, 그리고 세미나에 대한 내용 소개 좀 드리겠습니다. 다들 뭐 메일이나 신청하실 때 보셨죠? 저희 챗 GPT의 새로운 패러다임이라는 주제. 그래서 두 가지 세션 두 개를 준비를 했고요. 첫 번째 세션은 오픈AI의 최신 발전과 현실적인 활용 방안. 뭐 이런 주제로 챗 GPT-4, 요즘에 4 나왔잖아요. 4랑 API에 대해서 조금 알아보는 시간을 저희 콜트 스틸 강사님 통해서 들을 예정이고요. 그 다음에 두 번째 세션으로는 데이터 과학을 위한 챗 GPT. 그래서 누구나 활용할 수 있는 데이터 사이언스라는 주제를 가지고 이거 뒤에 너무 어려워. 못 읽겠어. 제가 오늘 영어는 좀 자제하려고요. 외국분이 들어와 계셔가지고. 어차피 지금 다 통역이 되고 있잖아요. 그죠? 그래서 동시 통역을 하고 있기 때문에 영어 안 쓰고 한국말을 이렇게 편하게 진행을 하고 있습니다. 너무 편해요. 네. 예, 이렇게 동시통역 말씀드리려고 그렇습니다. 그래서 이 주면에 보면 혹시 모바일로 들어온 사람도 아마 창이 하나 뜰 거예요. 그래서 통역 기능을 오늘은 활용할 수 있게 줌 웹비나로 준비를 하고 있고요. 이 통역 버튼을 딱 누르시고 한국어로 세팅을 하시면 이제 이따가 강사님들은 영어로 발표를 하실 테니까 전 영어로 들을 거예요. 네, 참고로. 그래서 이렇게 한국어로 딱 세팅해 놓으면 한국말로만 들을 수 있습니다. 우리 통역사분들이 엄청난 또 통역을 해주실 거라서 이렇게 해서 편하게 들으시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 원본으로 듣고 싶으시면 원본 오디오 그대로 하거나 영어로 하시면 될 것 같습니다. 그래서 요거 기능 기존 세미나랑 좀 다르게 있으니까 참고하시면 되겠습니다. 그리고 오늘 사전 질문도 많이 주셨고, 그 다음에 라이브 질문, Q&A 줌에 있는 세션 통해서 라이브 질문 하신 분들한테 제가 데보션 굿즈 3개를 세미나 말미에 이제 추첨해서 드릴 예정이고요. 특별히 또 유데미에서도 오늘 많이 이제 오셨는데, 유데미의 챗 GPT 강의 쿠폰을 저희 오늘 신청하신 모든 분한테 전달해 드리려고 합니다. 강의 할인 쿠폰이네요. 네, 강의 할인 쿠폰. 유데미 많이 들으시죠? 네. 그래서 이 정도로 제가 잠깐 짧게 소개를 드리고요. 5분만 쓰려고 했는데, 그죠? 콜트와 토니님을 바로 모시도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째는 콜트님이거든요. 콜트님 이제 발표 자료 띄워주시면 감사하겠습니다. 네. 자, 이제 준비해 보시죠. 네. 기대됩니다. 통역 한국어로 설정 부탁드립니다.
Hello, everyone.
말 잘 들립니다. 화면 발표 자료가 안 떴어요, 아직. 박수들 엄청 치고 계시네요. 네, 감사합니다. 네, 발표 자료 떴습니다. 네.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Colt. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So the first thing that I want to say is I know we have a mixture of skill levels here. Some of the participants are already familiar, not just with ChatGPT, but also with the AI products put out by, or the API products put out by OpenAI. And then some of the other participants are familiar with ChatGPT, but have not tried the APIs with code. So I'm going to try and talk about both, but a lot of what I'm going to focus on is how to use the OpenAI products in your code and different projects and different use cases, parameters, and other things you need to know to write code that is powered by AI. Okay, so I have some high-level information I would like to get through pretty quickly because I think most of us know it, and I want to get to the more interesting stuff. But just in case you don't know, OpenAI is the company behind ChatGPT and many other AI-powered models, including DALL-E, which generates images, and Whisper, which takes audio and can turn it into text and translate that text. So OpenAI was founded originally actually as a nonprofit, and they had one goal of developing cutting-edge AI research, but also making sure that it was friendly for humans and towards humankind. And that was what they were originally founded as, by a group of some very big individuals in the tech industry, most notably Elon Musk, who subsequently left OpenAI because of a conflict of interest with Tesla and the AI development that they were undergoing, competing potentially with OpenAI. So the biggest thing that happened in the history of OpenAI is a shift. They started as a nonprofit. They started as a nonprofit, and they, in 2019, became a for-profit company, which is when they first started releasing API products. So before 2019, everything was completely open source. There was no APIs. There was nothing you could pay for. It was all just a research nonprofit. So I have a timeline here. I don't think it's worth spending too much detail, but I believe we can send these slides to you if you're interested in seeing them after the talk is done. But in the early days of OpenAI, most of the research was focused around video games and writing artificial intelligence to beat video games or to beat professional video gamers. And then after they became a for-profit company, they started really focusing on the GPT family of models. So GPT-3 was released in June of 2020, And at the same time, they released an API for developers to pay to use GPT-3 within their code. In 2020 as well, the DALL-E website was launched and the DALL-E model was launched, which at least in the US was a big deal. Lots of people on social media were generating images from text and having a good time sharing those images. And then most recently, of course, in 2022, ChatGPT was released, which is the web-based chat client to interact with GPT. And then more recently, in March of this year, the Chat-API was released, which is mostly what I'm going to focus on in this video or in this lecture. And then probably most significantly, GPT-4 was released, at least with a wait list last month. So I still think there's a wait list. You have to be approved to have access to GPT-4, the API. You can pay money to have access to GPT-4 in the chat client, which I hope everyone can still see my screen here. I tried to share all the correct windows. If you can't see this, please put a note in the Q&A, and I'll be able to see that, or in the chat, excuse me. Okay. So let me open up my chat so I can see this. Okay. So if you're confused about the terms GPT-3, GPT-4, and GPT 3.5, the GPT, just to get this out of the way, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And what the transformer part is the most important piece here. It is a specific type of architecture for a model that enables it to do very, very impressive things with text. So GPT-3 was released in 2020. GPT 3.5, which is not a new model, it's not trained from scratch. It is just a finely tuned version of GPT-3, was released over the last year or so. And then in March of this year, GPT-4 was released, which is a completely new model. Okay. So I don't want to talk too much about the technical details, but all of these models, GPT-3, GPT 3.5, GPT-4, they are all text-based models. We provide text as an input. We get text as an output. I think everyone is familiar with that. We can do very simple things. The color of the sky is, and then it will try and complete the text. And that could be a single word, or sometimes it will write a whole sentence or a paragraph, and we can control that. We can tell it how we want it to respond. It can do things like translation. Translate the following to Korean. I don't speak Korean or read Korean. I hope this is the accurate translation. This is what GPT-4 gave me. Or we can even do things like ask it for recommendations, ask it to classify the sentiment of text, to extract information. There's so many use cases for it. It's so different from most APIs where you have a single purpose. With these GPT APIs, you can do almost anything. So again, the transformer architecture is what makes the whole thing work. And the transformer architecture was first written about in a paper in 2017 called Attention is All You Need. If you're really interested in how it works, I'm going to just completely skip most of these slides just for the sake of time, but you can read these slides later, or you can read the paper called Attention is All You Need. What makes the transformer model so effective is that it doesn't have to process inputs one piece at a time sequentially. Contrast that with what's called a recurrent neural network, or an RNN, which is sort of the old way of building language models, which are very slow to train and they require data to be fed in one piece at a time. Transformers instead are able to process basically the whole input at once. And this means they can be trained faster in parallel and trained on way more information, more data. So there's two really key innovations that were released, or that were added by the transformer architecture. One is called positional encoding. Another is called self-attention. And that's all that I'll say for the sake of time here. You can read these slides. It's more detailed than anyone really needs to know. If you're going to use these products, the magic of it is you don't really have to understand how it all works behind the scenes. Otherwise, you could build it yourself. But that's why we pay to use it as developers and as ChatGPT users, is that we don't have to worry about how to build the AI or the models. It's done for us, and we just interact with them. Okay, so moving past the technical details here, what I want to talk about mostly now is how we go about interacting with these tools. You can see I have a handful of slides here you can read about. There's more information as well about how the model was trained. For GPT-4, OpenAI has not released any information on how the model was trained, what data it was trained on. For GPT-3, that is open source. It's written about. OpenAI has discussed the text and the websites and the books that the model was trained on. It's basically a lot of the internet and most of, if not all of English language Wikipedia, thousands and thousands of books, lots and lots of web pages. So for GPT-4, we don't know what the data set is, but it's significantly larger. That's a safe assumption. And then same thing for the size of the model. There's information released about GPT-3 and how big it is and how much it costs to train it originally. None of that data is available for GPT-4. Okay, so as I mentioned, most of you are probably familiar with using ChatGPT, which is a website that allows us to interact with the GPT family of models. You can select if you want to use 3.5, or if you pay, you have access to GPT-4. And I can type a question in here and get an answer, of course, right? Or if I type gibberish, it will respond back to me, telling me it doesn't know what I'm talking about and that it's confused. But it is a chat-based client. We can use the APIs instead to interact with the same model behind the scene in our code. And specifically, the first step here is to sign up for an API key if you don't have one already. They make it a little bit hard to find. If you go to the OpenAI website, there's no button here to sign up. You have to go to the developers page. And then in the corner, you can see I'm signed in, but you'll see a button to sign up. And once you have signed up, you'll have access to an API key, which is critical in order to use the APIs. The next thing to know is that you will be charged to use the APIs, and I'm going to talk about how that works in a moment. But you, at least as of yesterday, you get $5 free, which is a lot. $5 of tokens will potentially allow you to make thousands and thousands of requests. Okay. So when it comes to actually making our requests, there's two different ways that we can talk to the GPT models through code. There's the old way, which is through the completion endpoint. This is the simpler way, which basically is very similar to ChatGPT. You provide just a single message at a time. And this is what it looks like if you were to use Python. You can use any language. There's a JavaScript client, but you can also use any language you want. But for this lecture, I'll be using Python just to demonstrate. So what we do is provide a piece of text, a prompt. Tell me a joke, just as an example. And it will respond back with, hopefully, a joke. So I can show a very quick example of this. I hope you can still see this window. If not, please let me know in the chat. So here I'm going to make a question, or I'm going to make a completion request where I'm going to ask it, how do you say hello in French? And it might take a little bit, but when it's done, I should see an answer in here. And here it is. It says bonjour in French. And notice here, the data itself is nested quite a bit. If I really wanted to get the data, it's located inside of choices. And then that's a list. And then inside of there, it is inside of the text property. And then I can see bonjour. This is very simple, of course. Maybe I'll ask it to say hello in Korean. And I cannot pronounce this or read it. I hope that is accurate. As far as setting up the API key, by the way, I won't go into much detail here, but you set the API key right here. And you could just manually put your key in there, but it's not a good idea to share that with all of you. So I'm putting it in a hidden file and importing my API key. So this is the old way of doing things. And in fact, this does not support GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 Turbo, which are the newer models. If I try and do this, I get an error. And it complains down here that says GPT-4 is a chat model, and I can't use the completions endpoint. So that brings us to the other way of making requests, which is to use the Chat-API. The Chat-API was released in March, just a month or so ago. And it's very similar in that it interacts with the GPT family of models. But the difference is that we do it in the form of a conversation, a list of messages. So you can use it for a single purpose, like tell me a joke, or convert this from Fahrenheit to Celsius, or translate this from English to Korean. It doesn't have to be a conversation with multiple messages, but it does have to be in the form of a conversation. So if I wanted it to tell me a joke, this is what it would look like using the newer API, the chat completion. I have to provide a list of messages. I can't just give it a single piece of text. It has to be a whole list of messages. In this case, it's one message, and every message has a couple of pieces of information that have to be present. Those pieces are, whoops, I must not have that slide. Those pieces are called the role, and the other is called the content. So I have another notebook here, just another document. I have the API client, OpenAI imported, and I'm going to call the chat completion.create method. I will be using GPT-4, and then I specify the messages. And my single message here, a very simple example, just has role set to user. Now there are three choices for role. It can be user or assistant, or it can be system. Those are the only three choices. And user represents me and you, the developers. It represents whoever is talking to the model. Assistant corresponds to what the model itself is saying. If you wanted to have a full conversation and give it some context, I'll show an example of this. You would set the assistant role to indicate any messages coming back from the model. And then the system role is usually a one-time message that you use to give it some context or to give the model a role, to say, you are a translating assistant. You are a Python writing assistant. So I'll show an example of that as well. And then the content in the message is whatever your text prompt is, whatever you want it to do. So this isn't really a conversation, but this is the only way I can use GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 Turbo right now. The traditional completion endpoint doesn't support this, and I don't know if it ever will. It's not very clear what their plan is long-term. So if I tell it to tell me a joke or whatever I want, I'll just run this. And I will say GPT-4 tends to be pretty slow these days. I think there's a lot of demand for it. You can see it gave me a joke. I don't know if this joke will translate at all in Korean. It's not even very funny in English. And what you'll also see is that the response is a little bit different. It's inside of an array or a list called choices. And then inside of that, we have to look at the message. And then notice it says role is assistant. It's still in the form of a conversation. So whenever I talk to it, I am the user. When it talks to me, it is the assistant. So let me show you an example of something that I built with this, a very simple project. We're going to start simple. I have a chatbot. If I go back here, I'll run this just to show you. It's basically ChatGPT in my terminal. So it has me say something like, hello. And then it responds to me. How can I assist you? Can you help me pick a movie to watch? So just like I would use ChatGPT, there's nothing revolutionary about this project. It's just a simple demonstration that we can basically rebuild ChatGPT if you wanted to, in this case, using the command line. And then it continues to talk to me. What type of movie are you in the mood for? Do you want comedy, drama? Let's say I want comedy. I can also do some fun things like, you can see it's getting a little slow right now. As I mentioned, GPT-4 can take some time. Okay, it gives me some movie recommendations. But the other thing that I can do that's kind of fun, if I clear out of here, is I can give it a personality. So I could say something like rude. Whoops. Dash personality. Hello, how are you? And now it's going to be rude to me, which is not very useful, but it tells me I'm doing fine. I have to deal with annoying humans like you in real life. So the reason I show you this project, though, is that this is a good example of where the message format comes into play, because this is a real conversation. And if you look at the source code of this, I don't know how many people are comfortable with Python, but all that I'm doing is I have a list of messages that starts almost empty. It has just a single message from the system role. Remember, this is the third option to set the initial goal of the assistant. I can tell it, you are, in this case, a conversational chatbot. So that's what I'm telling it. And then I have a message from the user, and I add that to my messages. And then whatever I get back from the API, I will also add on to my messages, because there's no memory here. There's no continuation from one request to the next. It doesn't remember anything that I say unless I provide the full conversation history every time. So that's how you build a chatbot, is this list of messages is going to grow and grow and grow and grow. And I'll show that to you. At the very end, I'm printing out the messages. I'll just show you right here. This is my messages that I provided. Let me have a slightly longer conversation. Let's go back to just a friendly assistant, not a rude one. Hello. And then I'll say, how are you tonight? And what should I eat for dinner? And then we'll be done with this. So I've built up a little conversation. I will close this out. And just to show you, this is what was passed to the API the last time through. I'll just put it in the bottom here of this file. It's the full message history. So we have the first message right here, and then the second message, and then this is the message coming back to me from the API. And then I have my next message that I said, how are you tonight? So this is how we can build a chatbot that remembers things, because otherwise it has no recollection at all. There's no persistence of information. I have to send all of the data every single time to build out a full conversation. This is how I give it context. All right. So I hope that's clear, even if you're not familiar with Python, that we provide a set of messages. And the messages can be a system message, or they can be from me, the developer, or from the assistant, in which case, the assistant is GPT-4 or GPT-3, whichever one you're using. And when I make these requests, in this case, I'm using 3.5 Turbo, and I'll talk about why. It's faster and it's cheaper, and it tends to work just fine. GPT-4 is a little slower and way more expensive. So unless you really need it, I've been avoiding it just because it's slow and it costs a lot of money. All right. So going back to my slides here, I do want to talk a little bit more about, so that was a simple chatbot. I want to talk about tokens and how we're built. This will be quick, but when we work with these GPT models, they don't bill us, they don't recognize words necessarily. They work with a system of tokens, which are basically a couple of characters together. In the English language, a token is roughly 4 characters of text. And the model will take our data we give it, tell me a joke or translate this sentence, it will turn that into tokens. And then it also is going to have those tokens that it generates that are then basically turned into words for us. So it works with tokens as inputs and outputs. And the reason this matters is that a phrase like this, I like hamburgers, which is 3 words in English, is 5 tokens. Each box you see here represents a single token. And when the model charges us, it bills us, or when OpenAI bills us, it bills us based on based on tokens. It will take all of the tokens in our input and add them to all of the tokens in the output. It sums them together, and then it prices us depending on the model that we're using. So here's a list of some of the models, specifically focus on these bottom 2. These other models, I'm not really going to focus on here. The other models like Text, Curie, and Babbage, and Ada are very cheap for the most part, but they're also very limited. So they can work well if you're doing something very simple and you're concerned about cost. If you're doing something at scale, millions and millions of requests. But we're talking about GPT 3.5 Turbo, which you can see is way cheaper than GPT-4. $0.002 for 1,000 tokens. GPT-4 is between 6 and 12 cents. So many times more expensive, or at least a couple times more expensive than GPT 3.5 Turbo. So I always try and start with the cheapest model first. And if it's not working, then I can try going up to the more expensive model. But I have yet to find something that I really needed GPT-4 to do, at least in code. I'd say GPT-4 is nice when I'm working with ChatGPT if I want help writing an email or fixing, something that, let's say, copy for my website, an ad or something, where it's a higher level task, I'll use GPT-4 for that. But for most of my code-related tasks, GPT 3.5 Turbo is the better choice, and it's cheaper. So if we go back to one of the requests that I made earlier, like this one right here, this simple one where I said, tell me a joke. In the response, it tells me the joke, it gives me the message, but it also gives me this usage property, and it tells me the total number of tokens, 13 that it wrote for me, it completed, and 11 in my prompt. So this is the 11 tokens here. And then this right here is the 13 tokens, and it adds them together. And then it bills me at, if it's 24 tokens, and it bills me at $0.002 for 1,000 tokens. Basically, it's a very small fraction of a cent. Okay. The next topic I'd like to cover is prompt design. So this is something that there's full courses on. There's a lot we could talk about, but I just want to give you some basic rules when you're working with chat, both in terms of, or if you're working with the API or with ChatGPT, these are good things to keep in mind. First of all, you want to provide instructions that are clear. So that part's probably the most obvious. Provide your input data. And then what I find to be most important is instructing the model how I want it to respond, what the output should look like. Because otherwise, it will just pick some format. It might give you a sentence or a paragraph or a single word. And I think it is really helpful if you tell it exactly what you want. And sometimes that means giving it examples. So here's a very simple set of instructions. Complete the sentence. If I didn't tell it to complete the sentence and I just said humans are, it might go on and on and on and give me a paragraph of text. If I say complete the sentence, it will only give me a couple of words to finish the sentence. So that's kind of a silly example. It's not very useful to pay OpenAI to complete your sentences, but that is a set of instructions that you can give. It's also good to be very precise with your language. So, tell it exactly in 3 to 4 sentences, explain this, or give me a sentiment analysis of a tweet, or whatever it is. Use precise language. In this case, I told it in 3 to 4 sentences, explain the role of the Supreme Court in US politics, and you should gear the explanation towards middle schoolers. But as I said, most important in my experience is being specific about the output. There's a lot that we can, a lot of different formats that we can get our data out from the model. So in this example, I'm asking it to extract the place names from this input text. And if I didn't tell it what format I wanted, who knows what it would give me. It could be a sentence. It could give me a list. It could give me an object. It's unclear, and it's not always going to give me the same format. But if I tell it exactly what I want, the desired format is a comma-separated list of places. It should give me a comma-separated list of places. So let me show you a simple example of this. This matters a lot when we're working with code. I'm going to be using the playground here. Instead of doing it in a Python notebook, I think it's easier to follow if I use this playground tool. So if you're signed in, this is different than ChatGPT. This is for developers, where I can tweak all the parameters over here, but I can interact with the models the same way. So it will send a request for me behind the scenes. If I just told it to, let me show you an example here of, let's go to Airbnb, the Wikipedia page. And I'll take a piece of text here and just copy this. Extract the place names from the following text. And then I'll give it the input. This is what I'm giving it. Let's see what it gives me. It will probably give me a comma-separated list. But notice here, it also says answer. And that could be a problem if I'm writing this with code. If I just want the set of names, I don't want to have to worry about answer, because next time it might not even say answer. It might actually say something different, like places, or it might say output. So it makes it unpredictable and harder to write code. Imagine I'm doing this on thousands and thousands of different Wikipedia pages to get every place name or customer reviews or tweets or something. I needed to have a dependable format every single time. So what I would do here is instead, I would say desired format. I wanted to give me a list of places as a comma separated list. And then what I can do down here is tell it, give me the places, just like this. And hopefully it will fill in the blank because I told it this is what the output should look like. And I gave it places already. So it's not going to write that for me, I hope. And there we go. Now it only fills in the city names and the place names. So I could do this 1,000 times and it should always give me the same format. I could also ask for JSON, for example. Let's say JSON list of place names. And let's see how that does. If you're familiar with JSON, there we go. It gives me valid JSON. And that makes it very easy to use in my code because then I can just parse the JSON and we're good to go. So that's just a simple example, but it's very powerful to specify exactly the data, the format that you want. Additionally, sometimes it's very useful to provide examples. So there's something called zero-shot prompting, which this is an example of. I give it no initial examples. I just tell it what I want and I hope it will work. Extract keywords from the text. And sometimes that works and I start there. But if it's not working for me, the next step is to give it an example. So I could say, extract keywords from the following text, and then I give it an example text, and then I show it example keywords. And then I give it another text, and I show it example keywords. And then I can give it a third text and tell it to give me the keywords. So by providing these examples, I can hopefully get a better result. Like I said, I prefer to start with no examples. And then if it's not working or if it's unpredictable, I'll provide examples to try and get a more specific output. So that's a little bit about prompt design. There's much more we could talk about, but I'm going to show you now a simple but very fun project that I've made that is a good example of designing a prompt. So this project is a color generator, a color palette search engine, if you will, where we can specify a text prompt like tropical ocean with sand. And I've made a website, a front end for this. This is going to get me a set of colors that match the prompt. In this case, tropical ocean with sand. It looks good to me. And it gives me the colors and I can copy them and paste them. I can also do things like Google brand colors. Let's ask for 4. And this will go and try and find colors for Google, the Google logo. And we get 4 Google colors. So this is done with GPT-4 behind the scenes. And the prompt, I'll just show it to you here, looks like this. Let me get rid of this right here. The prompt is a set of messages. And I have one message at the beginning. I'll just add some returns in here so we can see them separately. This is our system message. It says, you are a color palette generating assistant that responds to text and generates color palettes. You should generate color palettes that fit the theme, mood, or instructions of the prompt, and they should be between 2 and 8 colors. Then that's the system role that says, this is your overall purpose. Then we have my first example. So I give it an example of a conversation. We talked briefly about this concept of zero-shot versus few-shot prompting. I decided to give it examples, to give it a couple of shots, if you will, to tell it exactly how I want it to work. So as you can see here, I continue the conversation with role of user. I give it an example. I want you to convert the Mediterranean Sea into colors. And then I show it exactly what I want it to give me. And the format here is important. I give it a JSON list because that makes it very easy when I'm writing code to just take the response and turn it into Python, and I immediately can work with that data. When I first started doing this, trying to get colors, it was giving me all sorts of different responses, things like, colors, and then it would have a numbered list like this. And that's okay if it did that every single time, but it didn't. the next time it wouldn't put the numbers there, and it would put a bullet point here or a dash. And so it made it really hard to parse the information. This is what I want. So instead, I just told it, all right, this is what I want you to give me. And I continue the conversation. If the user, that's this message, asks for sage, nature, and earth colors, this is what you should respond with. And then finally, one more user message, convert the following description into a list of colors, and then I give it the actual description coming from the website. So it's not the most exciting project. It's fun. It's a good visual illustration, but it's nothing, remarkable. It's not going to make money, but it does show a couple of things. One, the message-based format, and two, how to write a good prompt that specifies the output format. Because if I didn't do this, like I said, it gives me very unpredictable outputs, which is fine if you're just talking to it in ChatGPT. But in the world of code, we need something that's dependable and reproducible that always gives us the same format. Because then all I have to do is call json.loads in Python to turn this response from JSON into Python, and then I can work with it like any other code. So I do that a lot. I ask the model to give me JSON, because JSON is just a universal format that every programming language can parse and turn into workable data. Okay, so that is the color palette search engine. A simple example, but it's mostly, I showed it to you because I wanted to talk about prompting and how to write a good prompt with a dependable output. Next, after the color palette, I want to briefly talk about some of the parameters that the API expects. So there's a couple of them that are easy to understand. For example, I'll just really quickly show this. There's one called N. If I make a request here, I'll do this with the completion model. Instead of saying, how do you say hello in Korean? Maybe I'll say, suggest me 2 Korean movies to watch. All right. And I can't use GPT-4 here because this is the completion endpoint. So I'm actually going to have to go back to the old model, Text DaVinci 003. That's the best model that you can use with the completion endpoint. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's a parameter called N. If I set N to 3, for example, I'm telling the model to give me 3 responses, 3 full completions. So if I look at my response now, we have the first one, my sassy girl, and Parasite. As you can see, it finished on this line, Parasite and Old Boy, and The Handmaiden. The reason that it's behaving kind of weird here, if you notice, it's giving me 2 results every time, but it's not even finishing the result. You can see it's missing parentheses here, is that it is using up the maximum number of tokens it's allowed. You can see it says that it finished. The finish reason is length. By default, I can't remember the number. I believe it's 16 tokens or 12 tokens. There is a maximum number that it will complete for me. But if I change max tokens to be 100, this is another parameter. Now it shouldn't run out of space. If I look at my response again, there we go. It finishes just fine. Now I don't know why it's giving me, oh, I told it to give me 2. I forgot I asked for 2. So it's giving me 2 each time, which is fine. But I could ask for more. I could say, give me 5. And as long as it doesn't take up 100 tokens, it will give me 5 movies, some pretty good ones. And it finishes just fine. Notice this time it says finish reason is stop. Earlier it said length because it ran out of tokens. So max tokens allows us to give it more room to respond to us. All right, so those are the easy ones. The next parameter is something called temperature. This one's a little harder to explain. This is a number between 0 and 2. Usually you don't want to go above 1 because you get some very weird results. And the default is 1. Sometimes if you're using the playground, the default is 0.7. Basically, this controls the randomness of the output. The documentation also calls it the creativity. If you increase temperature, you get more random results. If you decrease it down to like 0, you can get more repeatable, what we would call a deterministic result, although it's not guaranteed to be deterministic. Deterministic, by the way, just means given the same input, you get the same output every time. That's not really how these models work. But if you set the temperature down very low, you have a greater chance of getting the same response. So I'll do a very quick demonstration of this. If I go back to, I'll just make another request down here. Why don't I tell it to write me a short poem about cats? Okay. And I'll say you can use 100 tokens. That's fine. And I'll set the temperature very low, which won't really, you won't really notice a difference because you have to run it over and over and over to start to see that we get the same results. But if I do run this here with temperature of 0, it's going to be the least random or the least creative. So it gives me a poem. Cats are so sweet, their purrs so complete, so on. Now, if I increase temperature very high, which I would never recommend going above 1, but if I do something like 1.8, it's going to start generating a poem that doesn't make any sense. It just kind of ignores I mean, these are not even English words. So it stops being useful once you go too high. But there's a middle ground where if you go 0.9 or 1, you can get more interesting results, but it's more random and you won't get repeatable results. If you decrease it down low, you can get more repeatable deterministic results. So that's temperature. For the sake of time, I will skip over this parameter called top P. This is kind of similar. It can alter the creativity and randomness of your output. You usually only use temperature or top P, not both of them together. And that's all that I'll say for now. It's just a more complicated one to explain, but it's another parameter. And then we also have two other parameters called frequency penalty and presence penalty. And both of these allow us to penalize repetition in the output. So frequency penalty is a number from -2 to 2. The default is 0. If you increase the penalty, basically you're going to penalize repeated pieces of text, which means we will hopefully get less repeated text. We won't get the same line repeated verbatim. If you decrease it down to like -2, then you are likely to get more repeated text. It's a little confusing because there is another parameter called presence penalty, which is similar. They work in a different way. And I think for the time that we have left, it's not worth telling you about them. But you can look at the slides or watch YouTube videos or check out the course I just released. If you do want to learn more about these penalties, they both have to do with preventing duplication and repetition in the output or encouraging repetition. Okay. Next up, I'm going to show you some examples of how GPT-4 can work with code and understand code. So over here, I have a couple of examples of asking GPT to do code-related tasks. The first example is a simple one. I'm asking it to explain a function. This is maybe useful if you're starting out, you don't understand how this function works. I have a function that I don't understand. I provide it in a message. I tell it, you are a Python explaining assistant, explain the following function, and I give it the whole function. And it hopefully will give me a nice explanation. It tends to do a pretty good job. As you can see here, it takes a little time with GPT-4. It doesn't always finish as quick as I'd like. Come on. Okay, well, while we wait for that, I'll show you some other use cases. I could give it a function, for example, in JavaScript and tell it to translate it to Python. As this still hasn't finished. Well, here's another example where I give it some code, in this case, JavaScript. I tell it to translate it to Python in a single message. Or I can even ask GPT-4 to write me code from scratch. Now, this is really only good in my experience to do small pieces of an application, write a function, do something small, write a class, fix your code. It's not going to generate, an application for you from scratch. Let's see if this finished. Okay, it did finish, and it gives me an explanation of how the code works. Now, the reason I'm showing this to you is that I want to make it clear that GPT-4 understands code, just like it understands text in written language. There used to be a model called Codex that was specific for code, and it has very recently been deprecated. It's no longer recommended that you use it because GPT-4 can understand and work with code just as well. So it can explain code, as you can see here. Let's see how long it takes to translate this JavaScript function into Python. If it takes more than a couple of seconds, I think we'll just move on. Okay, and here it gives me some Python. So this function, I called it mystery. And the reason I did that is I didn't want to tell the model what it did because I thought it might sort of cheat. It might make it too easy. But what this function does is it takes text, a sentence, and it capitalizes the first word of every, or the first letter of every word. So let's see if it works in Python. I'll call this function mystery. Hello, everyone. How are you? And it does indeed do what it's supposed to do. It takes every first letter and capitalizes it. A simple example, and it just proves or it demonstrates that it's comfortable with JavaScript or Python. And the word comfortable is the wrong word, but it can work with those languages just like it could work with English. So that's just a quick example with code. You could also ask it to write functions from scratch. Here I'm asking it to write a function that I don't know how to do this. I would look it up, but I have no idea how to take an RGB color in one format and turn it into a different format, HSL. So I'm sure you could find somebody who's done this online, but it takes some time. So this is a situation you would probably just ask ChatGPT, in the browser instead of doing it here in a code file. But there's many applications you could write where you might want the model to generate code or to fix code or to understand code. And this is taking a while, so I think we'll just move on from there. Okay. Another topic that's very important to understand if you're trying to do anything at scale is how to know how many tokens some operation will be. It's very simple if it's a couple of words or a paragraph, but if you're trying to do something over and over and over, thousands and thousands of times, it's not going to be very easy to know how much it will cost. And it's not just about cost. Each model has a maximum size, what's called the context window, for how many tokens you can give it and how many tokens it can give you back. So for GPT 3.5 Turbo, it's 4,000 tokens. For GPT-4, it's around 8,000 tokens. There's also a more expensive version that has a bigger window of tokens. But either way, you have to be cognizant of it. You have to pay attention to how many tokens you're trying to work with. So here's an example of using this library. It's called TickToken. It's actually put out by OpenAI. And its whole purpose is just to tell us how many tokens something takes up. That's it. So I'm not going to step through every piece, but in this case, the first thing I do is I tell it, I need you to tell me the encoding for GPT-4, and I put that in a variable called ENC. And then if I call this enc.encode function with hello world, this is going to give me a list of the token identifiers, which is not that useful if you're just trying to know how many tokens. So most of the time, what I'll do is wrap it with length, and it tells me that's exactly 3 tokens. Hello world is 3 tokens. That's simple. But here's a much more complicated example. I've downloaded the text of a full book. In this case, the book Peter Pan. I'll show you just a little preview of it. Whoops. Book text is what it's called. Here it is, a full book. Now, I need to know how many tokens this is. Maybe I want to provide the full book to GPT-4 and tell it to summarize it. There's a problem, which is it can't do that because this is going to be way, way, way too long. Let's get rid of this. It is 77,000 tokens for that book text. And remember, the maximum window is 4,000 tokens for GPT 3.5 Turbo, 8,000 tokens for GPT-4. So a full book is not going to fit in there. Not to mention that window is the input plus the output. So if I have 4,000 tokens that I can use and I give it 3,000 tokens of input, it can only generate 1,000 tokens of output. So we have to be cognizant of that and make sure we leave room to get outputs if we're doing a very long input. So this TickToken library is useful if I wanted to summarize a book, and this is something I do in the course I just released. You have to break it into small pieces. but you need to know how many tokens are in each small piece. It's not just about estimating the cost, which you can do if you just multiply this number of tokens by the price per token. It's about making requests that have the right number of tokens that fit into the request so you can get a response. It's a very important operation. So it's not just about cost estimating, it's also about building requests with the proper number of tokens, breaking something big into small pieces. So tick token is very useful for that. You can use it also, I showed an example of GPT-4. There's actually a different, I guess I can just show this very briefly, a different encoding for GPT-3. So the same book, 3.5 turbo. The same book here was 77,419 tokens with GPT-4. If I do it with GPT 3.5 turbo, oh, it looks like it's giving me the same response. Let me try one more example. Here's a GPT 3.5 model. There we go. With a different model, it's 95,000 tokens. So it does matter which encoding the model uses, which is what this library helps with. So that's probably too much detail, but that's a very important library if you plan on building anything big or real with GPT-4. The next thing I'd like to cover is a very interesting API that actually doesn't necessarily have to do with GPT-4 or any of the GPT models. OpenAI puts out an embeddings model. Now, embeddings is this concept of taking text, a sentence, a paragraph, a word, and turning it into numbers, specifically turning it into vectors. And once you do that, if you do that with a lot of data, you have thousands of data points, and they're all basically points in space. You can calculate the distance between them to do things like search or make recommendations. And it's very complicated how it works behind the scenes. That's the magic of these models, is we don't have to care about it. But OpenAI has a model called Text Embedding ADA 002. So this is not GPT-4, it's not GPT-3, it's a separate model. And it has one job. You give it a piece of text, and it returns to you a very large vector, 1,536 dimensions for that vector. It's just a bunch of numbers in a list, basically. And you can store those vectors. They're not going to be very useful on its own, just a single vector. But if you have a huge data set of them generated from, let's say, movies or books or customer data or product reviews, if you have enough of those embeddings stored, those numbers, you can do math between them, like I said, to build a recommendation or to perform searches, to do Q&A. So when I say it turns it into a vector, it literally just takes a piece of text like kimchi stew and turns it into a bunch of numbers. What's magical, though, is that those aren't random numbers. Those numbers, that vector, is correlated to the content of the text, to the meaning of the text. And it's trained with tons and tons of data. This is not something that me or you could just do. At least I can't. But it's trained with a huge data set. And that's the whole point of this model, to take text, content, turn it into numbers. So if you do that enough with a bunch of different pieces of text, you can get some very interesting results. So I'm going to show you a movie data set that I did here. I'll first just show you this API. So it's the same OpenAI client that I was using earlier, but a different endpoint, openai.embedding.create. And when I run this, you can see the result that it gives me is very different. It's a huge list of numbers. Remember, it's a vector that's 15,036 dimensions. So a lot of numbers. And if I do that over and over and over, which is what I've done in this notebook, using movie data. Now, I should have done this for Korean movies. I did this with American movies because I'm more familiar with them. So I took only 5,000 American movies. You can see some of them here, a couple of examples. I took 5,000 of them, and I generated an embedding for each one. So I took each one and turned it into this huge vector, 15,036 dimensional vector, and I saved that in a database. And the first thing that I'll show you is there's a lot in this notebook. There's cost estimating, but the first thing I'll show you is we can plot them. So this website and this tool helps me plot these vectors. Of course, there's a problem, which we can't plot 15,000 dimensions as humans. I can't visualize that. I can't see it. But you can do math to turn them into two-dimensional points in space, which is what you see right here. So this is two-dimensional space. All the different embeddings I generated, there's been math to basically downsize the dimensions and put them in space. You would, in the real world, use a vector database. There's many of them out there, like Pinecone, for example, to make the querying way more efficient. But this is just a simple example. And you'll see we get some very interesting clustering. Now, I don't know how familiar everyone is with American movies, but like this cluster here, I think it's vampire movies. So we have like Twilight is here, and Vampire in Brooklyn, and Blade, werewolf movies, Dracula. So these are all vampire like horror movies, basically. We get this natural clustering of information. So if somebody was to search, let's say, for whatever this movie is right here, it's Avengers, we can write code that can recommend the nearest neighbors. Let's say the three nearest neighbors: Captain America, and what else do we have here? Ant-Man, and some other Marvel movie, I assume, Captain America Civil War. So this is a very simple example, but this is taking, this is visualizing it for you and for me, because it's hard to understand how this works otherwise. But when you see your data clustered here, remember, I didn't do any of this. All that I told it was take this movie and turn it into numbers. That was it. And the model itself has been trained so much that it's able to take a movie plot. To be clear, I use the movie plots, not the titles, to take the movie plot and generate it into turn it into this embedding, this 1536 dimensional vector. And that clustering happens naturally. I never told it, to form a grouping in any way. It just does this. So we can then write code to actually do the searching. I think it's too much work to explain it right now, or too much time, but you basically write some code that finds the nearest neighbors in 1536 dimensional space, but it's simple enough math, and there's libraries that will do it for you. And not to mention, vector databases that make it easy. So that's one example of, where you might use embeddings, is just to make a recommendation or a search. I think am I almost out of time here? I see, let me know. I've got like 2 or 3 minutes left, if that's okay. So the last thing that I'll show that's most interesting about embeddings is a completely different way to use them. It's not just about search and recommending movies, which you could do, no problem. You could make a recommender, for whatever products with your own product data at your company. What's most interesting to me is how you can use embeddings to power or to improve the knowledge of GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 Turbo. So an example of this is the models have been trained up to 2021 for GPT-4. So if I ask it a simple question, I don't know if anybody watches Formula One, but who won the Monaco Grand Prix in 2021? It's probably going to be able to answer that, because it was trained up to 2021. So it says Max Verstappen. But if I ask for 2022, it's already happened. Of course, you may not know who won, but it's Sergio Perez, I think. But the model doesn't know that. So it says it has not taken place yet. There is no winner. So what I can do is actually use embeddings to generate my own list of embeddings from whatever data I want. Let's say Formula One data. I can do that for all the races, but I use Wikipedia in my example, all the F1 races from 2022. I store them in a database. And then when I ask a question like who won Monaco 2022, it can turn that into an embedding, and it can compare that to the rest of the embeddings in the database, find the 3 nearest pieces of information, take all of that and give it to ChatGPT or GPT-4. It gives it new context, and it can use that to answer the question. So it's a little bit confusing. I don't know if it will make much sense. I'll just show a quick demonstration. I took all the Wikipedia pages from last season of F1. I turned them into embeddings and stored them in a database. And now I can ask a question like, who won the 2022 Monaco F1 Grand Prix? And it tells me it was won by Sergio Perez, which is correct. But the model doesn't know that. It wasn't trained on that. What's happening is I'm doing a search first to find the right data, and then I'm putting that in the question. So what you can't see is the question itself here actually has my embedding information added in. So I think because we're out of time, that's all that I'll say about it. But this is a very interesting approach. If you have company data, customers, products, reviews, anything that you want the model to know about, but it doesn't know about. It's not going to know about your customers. It's not going to know about your products, your customer service agents information. It won't know any of that. But if you want it to, you can generate embeddings on all of your own personal or corporate information, take those embeddings, store them, and then when somebody communicates with your model, when you query GPT-4, you can turn that into embeddings, find the nearest matches, take all of that and give it to the model. You're basically putting yourself in the middle or putting your code in the middle and doing a complicated search to get the most relevant information about your customers, about your reviews, and giving that to the model. And the prompt for the model will be very long. It will have all that data, but it will be able to answer questions that it wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So I have an example of that, like I said, with the Formula One code. If you're interested, you can take a look at the slides or join my course where I'll talk about it in way more detail. But that's the gist of it. And it's really important to be able to tell the model about things that it doesn't know about. And that's one way to do that. Okay, so I'm out of time. Thank you, everybody. I hope you learned something. And if not, I hope I didn't bore you to death. Oh, and I did just release a course. I believe we're going to send out a coupon to everybody who attended if you're interested. It goes into all this information in way more detail.
네, 감사합니다. 와, 엄청난데요? 와, 진짜 새로운 거 많이 얻었네요. 예. 너무 감사드리고요. 다음 바로 이어서 시간이 부족하니까 빨리빨리 진행할게요. 예, 토니님, 예, 발표 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 또 박수를 한번 모셔볼게요. 네, 너무 좋았네요. 네, 내용.
Everyone. Hey everyone, excited to be here. Thanks SK Telecom, thanks Devotion, Udemy Korea for having me. And thank you, Colt, for a very interesting presentation. I learned something new, even though I'm working with ChatGPT for quite a while. So my presentation today is about slideshow. Do you see my screen now? No, it looks like you don't see. 1 second. Okay, share screen. Okay, cool. You should be able to see my screen now. So while Colt focused on using ChatGPT mainly for developers, for developing apps, I'll try to focus on how to use ChatGPT in your everyday tasks and on an example of data analysis, like in your workflow, to save you a lot of time, timeline, and also nerves, actually. So I'm Tony. My main expertise is in marketing and digital analytics, and I've been in the field almost 2 decades. But 1 year ago, when I discovered generative AI, that was crazy, because I'm a process optimization geek, and once I discovered tools like ChatGPT and others, I was just mind blown how much time it can save you. Like literally, it saves me dozens of hours every single month. And Colt touched on that a bit, but I wanted to reiterate on the terminology I'll be using. So generative AI, first term we'll be using is a class of AI, artificial intelligence, that generates something. It can generate text like ChatGPT, or images like DALL-E or Midjourney. The second term is LLM, large language model. It's basically a text-based generative AI that is trained on huge amounts of data. And one of the brightest members of that class is ChatGPT. And what ChatGPT does is basically, the only thing it does is actually predicting the next word. And that's why when you use ChatGPT in web browser, you see that the results are not given to you as the whole text, but they are given word by word. So ChatGPT is basically predicting the next word real time. And the last concept I want to highlight here is prompt engineering. Basically, prompt engineering is the art of communicating with AI. You can basically write anything and get a response from AI. But like with any real person, the more vague your message is, the more vague answer you will get. And I mean, you will get a perfectly natural language answer, but if you are not very good in prompt engineering, you probably will get something that is not fit for your task. So that's important to learn prompt engineering, and that's basically the next, I believe, the next most important skill for the next 10 years. 3 principles of prompt engineering: it's being specific, providing context, and iterating. So being specific, as I mentioned, if you give a very vague prompt, very vague message to chat, you'll get something in response, but it won't be something that you are looking for. Next thing is providing context. So you can treat chat as a real person you are communicating with 2 key differences. First, this virtual person knows literally all the public knowledge and some non-public knowledge, which is a real person not capable of. And the second thing, this virtual person doesn't know anything about you. So it doesn't know about your situation, your task, anything. So it is very important when you ask chat to do something that you provide the context. I'll show that on an example a bit later. And the third principle is iterating. So however skilled you are in prompt engineering, you probably won't be getting the ideal result from the get-go. So iterating means you will need to write prompt to the best of your abilities, then get response, understand what's missing or what's wrong, and give more details to chat. And this way, step by step, iterating, you get to the best result. So when you don't get the result from the get-go, don't worry, it's okay, just iterate, give more details, give more context, and you'll get amazing results. In this webinar, I'll show you how to use ChatGPT for data analysis for 3 things. First is how to explore the data. Second thing is how to find insights and visualize the data. And third thing, which is, I believe, as there are many developers on the call, and I'm pretty sure you hate this, writing reports and emails with the insights and findings. So ChatGPT is just amazing, helping you do this in pretty much no time and giving you the result you wouldn't get spending much more time that you would have spent with chat. And having said that, let's go to my ChatGPT window. 1 second. Okay. So in this talk, I will be going through a case study of analyzing and visualizing the data from a survey we've done. And my CSV file with the data, it contains around 400 responses. And the topic of the survey was basically ChatGPT and other generative AI in life and work. We were asking mainly junior level developers and data scientists about their experience with ChatGPT, if they have any, and if they believe in this technology and its impact on the world. So first thing we want to do is we have that big file with the responses. If we just look at the file, it's very difficult to derive any insight. So what we start with is we ask Chat to give us some overview of the data. And here I'll explain how I built the prompt, basically prompt engineering. So I start with a very detailed description of my task. So I tell Chat, I want to understand the familiarity, sentiment, and experience of my target audience with generative AI tools such as ChatGPT, Midjourney, and others. Specifically, I will analyze the responses to a survey on ChatGPT, and I have this data in CSV format. I'm also telling what's the name of my file. That's important for later. And I'm telling that my goal is to gain insights that will help me create a better course on using ChatGPT for data analysis. And I'm also identifying what are the stakeholders of this project. So the stakeholders are myself as the course creator and my partner as the course producer. So you can see that even the start of the prompt is very, very detailed, very specific, and it goes into the detail about my situation, my task. So I'm giving a lot of context. But I'm not stopping here because still Chat haven't seen my data. And the next thing I'm providing Chat in the same prompt is I'm providing it with a part of my data. So I basically copied first few lines of my data so that Chat knows the structure of this data and what it contains. So I'm telling here the first few lines of my CSV file. And lastly, in the same prompt, I'm telling, please create a Python script showing overview of the data. And surely Chat gives us a pretty good Python script with all the comments. So even if you're not familiar with Python, you can still work with it. And I'll show it in a minute. So we get that code. We even get the description of how this code works and comment for each of the lines. So I'm just copying this code and I'm going to Google Colab. So Google Colab, for those who doesn't know what's that, it is a graphical interface to execute Python scripts by Google, and it's free to use. So you can just go to collab.research.google.com and start using it for free. So I'm basically pasting the code I got, and important thing. So this code, it expects that we have that file. So I need to upload that file here before I start using that code. And let's see if it uploaded. Okay, yeah, it uploaded the file. So I click execute. Once I see the green tick, that means that the code executed correctly. And we can see all the different details about the data. For those who are not familiar with data analysis, that will probably be a bit overwhelming. So here we are going a bit next step. So we are asking Chat to actually create a Python script that will show us visualizations of the data. And here I'm asking for univariate visualizations. Univariate meaning that every chart will just show data from one of the variables or one of the columns. And we get the code. Normally, it will give you the code within like 10 to 20 seconds. And probably even if you know Python very good, you will spend at the very least, maybe 5 to 10 minutes writing this code. So you're saving a lot of time on the way. We copy the code again, go to our Colab notebook, and we execute it. And as we have a lot of columns, so it will take some time to create all of them, and we see all the charts for all of the columns. Pretty good. They're good. We already can start deriving some insights. So we can see that most of the people who we're talking to, they are male predominantly. Education level is mainly they are highly educated. There were a few questions about their skills in specific fields like machine learning, like AI, and some other ones. And we can see that most of them are beginner level or middle level, which gives us already some good insights. But univariate analysis gives us some insights, but they're not extremely useful. And that's where we want the chat to actually give us information about the relation of different variables, which will be much, much more useful for us. And that's what we're doing. We're telling, please create a Python script to visualize education level versus believe in the impact of generative AI. And again, we get the code. We insert it, execute it, and we have a nice chart. The only thing that is missing on the chart is that we don't really know. We see that the more educated a person is, the more they believe in the impact of generative AI. But we actually saw that earlier, but let's imagine we haven't seen that. So we don't really know how many data points are here and here. And maybe there are actually, and in our case, it's actually the case, there are not so many people who are in this group, and most of the people are here. But we actually want chat to show us the numbers here. And that's exactly what we tell it. Add numbers of values for each of the bars. Basically see how we are iterating here. Though we didn't get some details of the response we needed, we can actually talk with the chat like it was a real person and give it more details and get the response. We copy the code, execute it, and okay, nice. We have an error, but it's actually very nice because that we have it, because I can show you how chat can correct itself with the errors. We just need to copy that error and put it back to the chat box. And normally, chat will give you, and it will apologize first, and it will give you an updated code with the fixed error. But in this case, we can see it says that it seems like the file could not be found. But if you noticed, my file was actually, the name of the file was different. And here we're actually facing a very interesting case, which Colt touched a bit on. So it is the limit of the number of tokens chat works with. So in the Colt example, it was working through API, which is more obvious. But in the chat box, it is much less obvious because it seems like the chat should know everything that what we were discussing before. But same thing like with API applies here. So chat only remembers, in this case, I'm using GPT 3.5. So it remembers only 4,000 tokens, which is around 3,000 words. So this means that in our current situation, actually chat forgot that the name of our file and some other details. And what we do, we give our prompt with giving the chat again the context. In our case, the context will be the name of the file we're using and some lines from it. And we get the updated code, which hopefully will be working. Let's see. Yeah, it's working. And interesting thing, in the last prompt, I wasn't actually telling chat to provide me the numbers, the number of data points used for each of the bars, but it provided it. So there may be two reasons for that. One reason, maybe it remembered because it was not far that I asked it to provide these numbers, or maybe it's because there is a variability in the answer when you are talking to ChatGPT. So you can put the same prompt a few times, and every time you will be getting a slightly different response. And the difference, the level of difference will basically will be the function of how specific you are with your prompt. So the less specific you are, the more variability there will be in the answer to the same prompt. The more specific you are, the more similar answers you will be getting. But another thing we see here on the on this chart is that now we can't even see this text because it's overlapping itself. And again, we are talking here with chat like with a real person. We tell it chart texts overlap each other, and it promptly gives us the solution. So it tells insert this code after the PLT bar function in our code. So here's the PLT bar. Just insert the next line after it, and boom. Now we have a visualization where we can see all the texts. Okay, perfect. So we explored the data, we visualized it, we found some insights. Now it's the time for the boring work, for writing the report for to our boss or to the other stakeholders with the insights we found. And here I'm basically telling, okay, perfect. Now I want to send an email to my boss outlining the insights I found in the data. Can you help me write that email? And this next message is extremely important. So I am kind of tricking chat into requesting the context and the details, because in many cases, when I'm working on something I don't have experience with, I cannot even provide the right details, the right context, because I don't know exactly what context and what details I want to provide. And that's the trick that solves it. We can ask chat to ask us as many questions as it needs to be able to provide us the best result. And basically chat goes on with before giving us the result, it goes on with the questions it wants to ask us. And first question is, what is the goal or objective of the email? Are you seeking approval for a project or presenting findings to inform business decision? So in our case, it's presenting findings to inform a business decision. So after that, chat asks us about the second question. Can you please provide me with some details about the business decision you need to make and insights you found in the data? So I'm providing that. Most of the respondents have high level of education and they believe in the positive impact AI will bring. And just after a few messages, very short messages to chat, we get pretty comprehensive email, like, dear boss's name, I wanted to share with you some interesting findings from our recent survey on AI and its impact on various aspects of life. Firstly, I want to highlight that the majority of respondents in our survey have a high level of education, with percentage of them having at least a bachelor's degree, and so on and so forth. Pretty long email, pretty comprehensive, nice language. You can actually also play around with language, telling chat, I want it in a formal language, or I want it in an informal language, whatever you name it, it can actually write it. You can even give examples of your own writings so that it will write similar to your style. And yeah, these are the three examples. You can use ChatGPT in data analysis, but as I mentioned, even if you don't know anything about data analysis or Python, you can still do data analysis with the help of ChatGPT because you can learn it on the way. And that's obviously what I will be telling about much more in depth in my upcoming course. Yeah, and the last thing I wanna say is, where's my, oops, second. Yeah, so also ChatGPT helped me translate the last word. I hope that is really thank you in Korean. So I left a bit more time to answer your questions because there were some really interesting questions we received already. But if you want, if you have some follow-up questions or if you need some help in using AI, you can reach out to me either through this QR code or through the organizers. Thank you very much. And let's go to the questions part.
네, 다시 제가 나왔습니다. 네, 이 시간만을 기다려왔습니다. 네, 질문이 왜 이렇게 많아요? 사람들이? 사전 질문도 많았는데 지금 질문이 많이 올라와서 이걸 다 커버를 할 수 있을까 시간 내에 좀 그럴 것 같아서 일단 저희가 좀 시간을 좀 줄이기 위해서 콜트님 답변은 서면으로 조금 대체하고 그죠? 앞쪽에 지금 영어로 막 질문 Q&A 창에 해주신 분들도 막 계세요. 콜트님이 직접 답변을 막 하고 있으니까 서로 이제 답변을 받으려고 하시는 것 같아요. 그래서 영어로 답변 콜트님 좀 답변 부탁드리고 아니 콜트님은 토니님 질문만 조금 사전 질문 일단 먼저 커버하고 라이브 질문 몇 개 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 그래서 사전 질문 한 사람들 제가 좋아하거든요. 예. 그래서 미리 이제 준비할 수도 있고 그러니까 좋거든요. 그래서 여기 두 번째 여기 질문 보면 토니님이 이제 답변하겠다고 쓴 내용인데요. 이제 이런 질문 비슷한 질문 좀 전에 라이브에도 올라왔어요. 저희가 이제 항상 챗GPT 쓸 때 부정확한 정보라든지 개인정보 침해, 뭐 데이터 최신화의 이슈, 뭐 이런 것들이 다 있는데 혹시 이런 것들을 해결할 수 있는 의견? 아니면 이런 걸 단점을 해결하기 위해서 GPT에서는 어떤 식으로 다른 기술들을 쓸 수 있는지 이런 거 좀 답변 좀 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 토니님. 괜찮으세요? 네.
Yeah, this is such a fast-pacing world. Like ChatGPT is the fastest growing app in the history. Basically, they got 5 million users within the first few days, and now they have hundreds of millions of users, and they are like, they went the ChatGPT went public, became publicly available just a few months ago. So obviously there is a lot of talks around it, both positive and negative ones. And yeah, there are also a lot of concerns about like confidential technology breaches and stuff like that. So I guess the main advice, my main advice, and that's a general sentiment on the market, is that for now, if you are using ChatGPT, especially for your company, try not to put any confidential information in it. Though probably ChatGPT won't be using it, but to make sure you are safe, still better not to put any confidential information. Yeah, deepfakes, I don't think we have any solution yet. And on that point, actually, like the stance Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has, is that, yes, there are a lot of possible societal shocks that this technology can bring. But probably it will bring much, much more value. But we won't get that value without that shocks, because, I mean, this technology is so much transformational. We won't recognize the world 5 to 10 years from now. It will be much more different than it was, like, say, 30 years ago, pre-internet era. So these kind of changes, they don't happen smoothly. So yes, prepare for some disruptions in every possible market, job market, technological market, economy, but prepare also for some very exciting sci-fi stuff. And like, I personally love sci-fi books, and like what I'm seeing now is what the classical writers were talking about 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. And it's very exciting to witness that. So yeah, there are some threats, but there are much more opportunities. And in terms of ChatGPT, I'll turn, oh no, it was another question. So yeah, I hope I answered that question.
네, 감사합니다. 예, 그럼 다음으로, 사전 질문 조금 더 커버해 볼게요. 콜트님이 좀 답변하실 부분이 있어서, 이 부분은 다 서면 대체하고, 여기 토니님 답변 마지막 분에 여기 있네요, 보니까. 오픈AI가 수집하는 데이터는 AI 학습 및 성능 개선에는 활용되지 않겠다는, 방금 얘기한 거랑 비슷한 내용이네요. 그죠? 네, 약관이 있어요. 예, 하지만 영업 기밀이나 개인정보 이런 것들은 유출이 될 게 이제 있어서 기업이나 국가 차원에서 규제가 늘어나고 있는 것 같아요. 예. 그래서 아까 답변 주셨네요. 그죠? 그래서 예, 조금 더 안 쓰는 게 좋겠다. 일단 현실적으로는 뭐 답변 주신 것 같아요. 제가 질문하고 제가 답변하는 느낌인데. 맞죠? 일단 그렇게 넘어가겠습니다. 네. 시간 관계상. 예. 다음으로 한번 볼게요. 그럼 토니님 답변 여기 하나 더 있는데, 예. 앞으로
I can actually add something to this specific question.
네.
So besides like ChatGPT, there are actually many more large language models available on the market, and there are other ones commercial like OpenAI, but there are also a pretty good amount of open source ones that you can install on your computer or in your server. And this way you actually sure that you're getting the power of this technology, but you can also provide it with confidential information, and it won't go anywhere beyond your server or your computer.
그러네요. 네. 추가 답변 감사합니다. 그쵸. 오픈AI 뿐만 아니라 다른 것들이 막 나오고 있으니까 앞으로는 그런 것들을 쓰면 되지 않을까 하는 생각이 드네요. 예. 다음 질문, 사전 질문 한번 볼게요. 앞으로 인공지능의 발전이 사회 전반에 유용하고 안전하게 발전할지 어느 정도의 기술 성장을 예측할 수 있을까요? 좀 거시적인 내용이지만 한번 답변 부탁드리겠습니다. 방금 제 목소리가 안 들렸나요? 들렸나요? 이제 들리나요? 혹시? 예.
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah. That's a very interesting question, and like a lot of debate is happening around it. Maybe some of you have seen the open letter from, right now it's more than 50,000 people already, including Elon Musk, Yuval Noah Harari, and some other people, which was requesting to hold the development of any AI that is more powerful than GPT-4. So some people are really frightened about the speed of it. Some are like very positive around it, but yeah, it definitely has a huge power to transform the society and deliver a lot of good, but it's not set in stone. That means that like any tool, like literally any tool when we invent it as a society, as a human race, it can be used for good and for bad, and how we will use it is totally dependent on us as a society. The most hot topic in this kind of narrative is AGI, artificial general intelligence. And again, there are a lot of people who are super excited about it and a lot of people who are very frightened about it, because it seems like we are very close to witnessing the birth of a new species, a new consciousness. And we don't know how it will interact with us. So I can understand, though I'm more positive about it, I can still understand that people who are frightened of it, because we don't know what to expect. It can like literally shoot us our technology and our development to the moon very fast, but it is also a huge existential risk. And it's still all speculations, because even the people who are developing this, they still cannot predict what will happen. And there are basically, there are people who are on the positive side of the spectrum. There are people who are like believing that we will all die because of AI. So, and some moderate opinions. So, I can actually, for those who are interested to follow what's happening in the field, I can create a list of people to follow, of the experts on all the spectrum from the negative to the positive, and share with you guys. And I'm personally following them. Very interesting, very thought-provoking, and they talk about all this much better than I do. So a lot of ideas I take from them.
네, 감사합니다. 뭐 채팅창에 지금 앨런이 얘기한 그죠? 6개월 멈추자는 뭐 의견도 오고 있는데, 이건 뭐 더 전문가의 또 의견도 한번 들어보면 링크 나중에 한번 찾아보겠습니다. 네. 그리고 이건 진짜 제가 한번 질문 드리고 싶었어요. 저 같은 웹 개발자, 웹 개발자들한테 챗 GPT나 많이 이런 인테그레이트된 AI, LLM 뭐 이런 거 활용해서 어떤 거를 공부하면 좋을지 이런 충고를 한번 부탁드리겠습니다. 네. 어드바이스.
I think actually Colt will be much better here to answer, because he's a professional developer. He has just released the course on specifically that. So Colt, I'll give you a word on that.
Okay. Hope everyone can hear me still. Okay, good. Yeah, I get this question a lot from my students because I work with a lot of students who are beginners, who are starting to try to become developers. And a lot of them worry, is it even worth doing anymore? You know, they have this idea that artificial intelligence will completely replace them. And, maybe that will be true 30, 40 years from now or something, but it's certainly nowhere near happening right now. Just because something like GPT-4 can write individual functions or can debug code or can explain code doesn't mean that it can write applications. And so I think the advice and the skill set that the mindset you need is you still need to be able to write the code. You have an assistant to help you build the small pieces, and you still have to stitch it all together. You still have to write, architect the whole thing. There's a skill set there still as a human that you can utilize these tools. And I do it all the time now, kind of what Tony was talking about, where you can get help with things that you don't remember how to do or that you never learned how to do. And you can take those pieces and tweak them and fit the puzzle together. But my advice is still, there's a lot of learning you have to do if you're a developer. If you want to fully integrate, if you want to go really down the pathway of AI, my advice is to stay up to date on whatever the next developments are. So if that is, OpenAI, but there's also now so many competitors that have just started in the last, even just the last couple of months. If you look at the new jobs that are coming out, there's a lot of AI companies with developer positions that are open. So I think we're still seeing the very beginning of what those products will look like. I think everybody in the world is trying to monetize this technology and figure out what the next company is and the next way to make money off of it. And I think a lot of them probably won't work, but I bet 5 years from now, there will be new companies, that are incredibly popular and very valuable that don't exist today or are just starting today, that are built using AI. So I think there's still plenty of opportunity for developers. It's mostly about keeping your skill set sharp in the same way that if you were a front-end developer, you had to learn React in the last couple of years. You'll do the same thing. You'll need to learn the next AI tool. And right now it's OpenAI. It's the most popular, but there probably will be many other tools down the line that you'll need to continue to improve your skill set with. So yeah, I think also just view it as an assistant, view it as something that can help you right now as a developer, not as an enemy, not yet.
예, 아우, 답변 너무 좋은데요? 예. 관심을 항상 갖고, 그죠? 있어야 된다라는 콜트님이 답변 주셨습니다. 그죠? 어떻게 될지 모르는 거예요. 그죠? 그리고 앱 개발자가 없어지진 않을 거예요. 그죠? 네. 자, 좀 사전 질문 하나만 더 마지막으로, 토니님 답변만 좀 들어볼게요. 그리고 이커머스 쪽에 혹시 적용된 사례? 이커머스나 물류 분야에 적용돼서 아마 이쪽 분야에서 오신 것 같아요. 이 질문자가. 어떤 사례가 있는지 혹시 알고 계시면 하나 답변 부탁드리겠습니다.
Sure. So logistics industry is extremely reliant on data, and especially e-commerce logistics industry, where there are like thousands and sometimes dozens of thousands of different goods. So it is very reliant on data to be efficient, to earn more money. And as I showed briefly, you can use ChatGPT to save you a lot of resource on doing the task you're already doing. So for example, analyzing the data, communicating between your between different departments of the company. And literally, imagine if one person can save dozens of hours a month, and again, to the Cole's point that it doesn't, at least for now, doesn't substitute for people, but it makes them extremely more efficient. So saving dozens of hours a month from one person, imagine if you're a big company saving the same amount on 1,000 people. So imagine how much money you're saving on that and how much more efficient you are. So yeah, definitely, I guess the main application will be data analysis, but other than that, I'm pretty sure logistics industry is one of the industries that can get the most value out of these technologies.
And if I can just add one thing about e-commerce, one area that I personally know some friends who are using AI to help with their e-commerce business is generating marketing materials, generating the emails, the subjects of the emails, the content of the emails, the ads that they're creating, the Facebook posts. They're using AI, and there's lots of companies that do this right now to help you reach your audience and write the correct, the best language that you possibly can. So that's one area definitely people are doing right now, whether you're doing it through ChatGPT or using a paid platform that generates language for you. And there's lots of platforms that help your whole company use language. And I think one of the most popular is called Writer. But I think that's an easy area, especially for a small business. Writing ads is not easy, and writing emails and figuring out the right language, that's a very easy place or a quick way to integrate AI into your workflows and quickly see an improvement.
네, 예, 두 분 다 두 분 다 답변해 주셔서 정말 감사합니다. 친구분 사례까지, 그죠? 이커머스 쪽 데이터 많으니까, 그죠? 데이터 분석하는 거, 마케팅 쪽, 뭐 다 활용될 수 있다라는 요약을 드린 거고요. 사전 질문은 좀 넘어갈게요. 라이브 질문이 너무 많아가지고, 그죠? 이제 아직 10분밖에 안 남아서. 자, 라이브 질문, 예, 엄청 많아요. 제가 정리, 그때그때 계속 이렇게 PPT에다 옮겨놓고 있었는데, 김기동님이 제일 먼저 해주셨어요. 예. 챗GPT에 유용하게 활용을 하려면 고객들과 함께 뭔가 시행착오를 많이 겪어야 될 것 같은데, 이런 부분에 대해서 혹시 조언이나 의견이 있으시면 말씀 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
I'm actually Cole. Do you quite understand the question? I think looks like something is missing, some context from the question.
Yeah, I don't exactly understand the question. It seems like are you talking?
데이터를 이제 유용하게 활용하기 위해서, 그러니까 챗GPT를 유용하게 활용하려고 하면은 근데 정합성이나 이런 것 때문에 아마 고객들하고 뭔가 시행착오를 많이 겪어야 될 것 같은데, 뭐 이런 사례들을 여쭤본 것 같아요. 네.
I see. Well, there's a couple of things I would say. One is, like any software, testing plays a very important role, user testing and doing, a beta test or a small group and slowly scaling your usage up and making sure something works first. But that's not unique to AI. That's just part of writing software in general. As far as trying to hone the models or improve the models, one topic I did not cover is something called fine tuning, which is something that it's a more advanced topic, but essentially you can try and train the models themselves on some additional information to finely tune the responses that you get back. Now, it is a very expensive process to do it in the real world, and that's why I didn't cover it. It's not a very practical thing for an individual to do, but at the corporate level, that is an option. You can read about it on the OpenAI website. They have articles about fine tuning, but it can cost thousands and thousands of dollars to do it well.
네, 파인 튜닝을 딱 얘기해 주셨는데 바로 다음 질문에 있어요. 다음 질문이 파인 튜닝 관련된 그 과정도 이제 어떻게 보면 상당한 GPU나 이런 것들에서 다 비용으로 작용할 것 같은데, 예, 이런 것들에 대해서 이게 LLM을 사용하기 위해서 이제 이 GPU 사용한 검색 이런 것들이 결국은 검색 플랫폼에 이제 비용이 들어가니까 손해가 되는 거 아닌가요? 라는 질문과 함께 한글에 대한 토큰 음절은 어떻게 끊기는지, 영문 토큰 발생 로직은 어떤 건지, 이런 거에 대한 질문이 윤성환 님이 있었습니다. 네.
So that's a very good question. I don't know the answer about how the Korean token usage is calculated. Honestly, my instinct would just be to ask ChatGPT and see if it will tell us, because I don't know. I'll try and do that in the meantime. As far as the English calculations, so there's these, I showed an example of the tick token encoder, which will show you the exact token identifiers that every piece of text generates. So you can do that, by the way, with Korean characters. You could pass that in and that will tell you exactly how many tokens are in a piece of Korean text. But additionally, it's actually a little more complicated than what I explained, because the messages format for the chat API, where you have to send a message and it has a role, who it's from, you're actually billed not just for the text, but you're billed 1 token or 2 tokens, I can't remember, for every message. Now, a token, you have to remember, is very cheap. We're talking about 0.0000 something dollars. It's a very small amount per token. So it's not a big deal. Somebody asked a question that I answered in the Q&A as text, about if it's expensive to add examples into your prompt. And my answer, I did a little math to show the example I showed with the color generation. I had examples in the prompt. It was 200 something tokens. Without the examples, it's 100 something tokens. And that seems like a big amount, twice the tokens. But if you ran that 1 million times, it would be a difference of $100 US. So it is a difference, but we're talking about millions and millions of times, where otherwise, if it's just you doing it or a small scale project, it really isn't expensive. So I think it's important not to have anxiety about using too many tokens. When you're starting out, you want to get the best prompts possible. And then it's a good problem to have if it gets expensive, because that means people are using it. And then you can worry about trying to save token costs. But generally, it's so cheap that worrying about every token is just it's not worth your time.
네, 답변 감사합니다. 생각보다 그렇게 많이 돈이 나가지는 않는다는 말씀이고, 여기 또 채팅창에 한국어는 음절당 2, 3토큰 정도 한다고 답변 누가 주셨네요. 네, 주윤님 감사합니다. 다음 질문 좀 보겠습니다. 네, 시간이 별로 없어서 김경희님 질문만 조금 한번 볼게요. 네, 그 최근에 구글 바드 나왔잖아요. 그래서 구글 바드하고 챗 GPT의 차이점에 대해서 한번 물어본 게 있고, 그다음에 요 3번째 질문. 네, 코딩을 챗 GPT를 활용하기 위해서 코딩을 따로 배우지 않아도 되나요? 아마 이분은 학생을 지도하는 선생님이신 것 같아요. 네, 그래서 그거에 대한 질문 2가지만 드리겠습니다.
Okay, so to the first question, Google Bard, I personally didn't use it a lot, but it's the same class of software, but obviously it was taught a bit differently on a bit different data set. So the responses will be a bit different, and probably Bard doesn't work with code yet. At least I haven't heard of that. I would guess that still GPT-4 is the most powerful general purpose large language model. But I mean, there are so many, it's very difficult to keep up with each of them. So like I myself, even if I'm doing this full time, I'm not able to test every single one. So if you are not going very deep, so ChatGPT will be the main one of choice for you. And for what was the second one? Sorry, I forgot. What was the second question?
If you need to learn to code.
코딩을 배우지 않아도 되나요? 예, 학생을 지도하는 선생님 입장에서. 네.
ChatGPT itself, for sure not. It's like communicating with your friend, literally. It's a chat where you can ask natural language questions and get natural language responses. And actually, I recently had a few few podcasts on the topic of using ChatGPT in education, and some people who are teachers, they're super excited because basically chat can provide a very personalized approach to different kids, say, because some kids are like, they have what's that, like they're very fast, or some are slower. And in the class, for the teacher, it's very difficult to basically do a personalized approach when you have 30 kids in the class. ChatGPT can help in that situation. You can start using it just like a normal chat. But if you, for some reason, if you are, for example, an informatics teacher, you can ask chat to help you teach your kids programming or the language you don't know. You can easily learn it with ChatGPT. Obviously, it will take some effort. It's not like just telling chat, teach me Python or teach me something, but you can get some pretty good results in learning any new skill, especially information technology skill using ChatGPT.
네, 답변 감사합니다. 그리고 제가 추가적으로 또 알고 있는 사실은 구글 바드가 한국어가 지원 안 된다고 하네요. 하여튼 뭐 그런 차이가 있답니다. 네, 그리고 라이브 질문 몇 개 더 하는데 지금 뭐 여기 영어로 질문하신 분들은 이렇게 토니님이 답변까지, 콜트님이 답변해 주셨고요. 그래서 좀 넘어갈게요. 시간이 지금 12시가 됐어요. 그래서 이제 어느 정도 하고 끝내려고 하는데 하나만 더 받을까요? 여기 신호철님이 질문한 내용도 답변을 잘 주셨고요. 콜트님이 감사합니다. 황민호님 질문 한번 들어볼까요? 네. 황민호님이 오픈 AI가 제공되는 솔루션이 기업들에서 약간 보안상으로 온전하게 사용하기 힘든, 아까 앞에도 얘기했지만 점이 있는데, 그래서 그 뒤에 나온 뭐 LLM 모델들이 많이 있어요. 그래서 알파카라든지 여기 비쿠나라든지 이런 것들이 나오는데, 이런 것들에 대한 전망을 어떻게 보시나요? 네, 새로 나오는 LLM 모델들에 대한 전망 한번 부탁드리겠습니다.
I can add something quickly. My expectation is that what we'll actually see in the future is more smaller models instead of these massive. So GPT-4 has been a huge leap, from GPT-3 to GPT-4, but OpenAI actually put out a statement saying that they don't plan on starting work on GPT-5 anytime soon, and that they actually anticipate, or at least Sam Altman, the CEO, anticipates going in the direction of smaller pieces that are better at individual tasks. And so I can see a world where, as a company, you might want something that's very good at being a chat assistant or something else that's very good at writing code. It doesn't have to be the same solution. And instead, it can be two models. And I'm sure, there'll be many companies, there already are many out there today, that you basically pay to have your data protected or wrapped, or follow the correct regulations to protect secure financial information or personal customer information, or whatever it is, where you'll pay to have the option to have your own version of each model. So that's what I expect to see in a couple of years, if not this. It already exists, but I expect to see more of that. I think OpenAI is unique because the buzz created by ChatGPT and by DALL-E and all these products in the last year or two, people have kind of conflated that with AI. And they're certainly at the forefront and they're the most popular, but there are many companies out there and many competitors that are working on very similar tools. So I think we'll just see more and more, and probably more small, very focused and very accurate products that companies can pay for, to subscribe to, or have access to.
Yeah, a couple of words from my side here as well. So basically, maybe a month ago, actually, Microsoft announced that they are integrating OpenAI into their Office products, basically, where ChatGPT can have access to your internal data, but at the same time, there are some security measures. I haven't tried it yet, but it looks like very promising. And as it's on the enterprise level, probably there are some good security measures. But also, Colt, you mentioned, and I don't know if you followed that, there is that Hugging GPT released a couple of weeks ago, which is just mind-blowing, which is one interface to all of the basically models existing. And you can provide it with an image and say, okay, how many objects are on this image and what are these objects? And it will actually select from all of the models that are best, and it it can, in any specific task, it can use several models to provide you with the best result. It's kind of a router for all the AI models, and it's super exciting.
네, 답변 감사합니다. 뭐 요새 뭐 많이 나오더라고요. 저 최근에 데보션 블로그에도 올랐죠. 오토 GPT도 있고, 그죠? 앞으로 이제 보안이나 이런 것 때문에 소형화된 LLM 모델도 많이 나올 것 같고, 뭐 그렇다는 말씀이십니다. 너무 시간이 많이 지났네요, 그죠? 다 식사하러 가신 분도 계신 것 같고, 그죠? 온라인으로 하니까. 그래도 뭐 하나 더 들어보고 싶은데 어려운 분들 모셔가지고, 그죠? 마지막으로 하나만, 요새 플러그인 그 나왔잖아요, 플러그인. 플러그인에 대한 의견도 한번 여쭤볼까요?
Yeah, I guess we both have something to say on that, because I mean, at least I'm super excited about that. It's just crazy because before that, we had a big problem of what's called hallucinations in AI. And hallucination is basically AI giving you a response even if it doesn't know the answer, because it's only LLMs, large language models, only function is to try to predict the next word. And if in your question you are tackling something that the AI was not trained on, or its data set is not very big, it will give you a perfectly natural language answer, which may make no sense. And if you are not familiar with the field, you can take it at face value and don't even notice it. But plugins, they actually solve at least partly that problem, because now you can have, for example, a plugin of Expedia or Booking.com, where you in natural language model, in natural language, you tell, okay, I'm going on a vacation there and there. That's my itinerary, and please give me the best tickets, and it will find you the best tickets. Because for now, without the plugins, it will give you some options, but they will probably be either very generic or specific, but not making any sense, because it will make it up. But with the plugins, like literally, I think a couple of days ago, they released a plugin, kind of a browser plugin. So now you can ask chat to address some information on some specific page real time, not like right now it's taking the snapshot of the data from 2021. So yeah, very exciting thing. Colt, I think maybe you have also something to add here.
Yeah, I think it's exciting also as from the developer side. There's a lot of opportunity for creating plugins. Right now, you have to get access to, just like with GPT-4, you have to get on a wait list to be able to create plugins, or at least play with the plugin API, basically. You have to be approved, and I finally got access yesterday, so I haven't tried it yet, but it's a lot of work to make a plugin. It's not simple, but the concept is, it's almost like apps for ChatGPT, where, as Tony said, you could create an Expedia app that will search and help you book real flights or real hotels, or make restaurant reservations. And those are simple examples, but I'm sure people will come up with examples that you can't even imagine right now. And I'm sure they'll be monetized, and there will be opportunities there for developers. So I'm excited to look at how it works and try making a simple plugin, and I don't know what it will be. But yeah, I think it's an exciting opportunity where you have so many people using this one product, and all of a sudden there's going to be an app store where you can start making applications for it. It could be, I don't know, it could be a gold rush. It might not be all that exciting, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there as a developer.
네. 제가 이 질문 잘했죠. 우리 듣는 사람들이 다 개발자라서 희망을 주고 싶어서 일부러 질문한 거예요. 그 엄청난 기대가 있을 거예요. 그 플러그인 스토어 뭐 이런 것들이 나온다고 하니까 저는 여기에 이제 관심을 많이 갖고 있고, 여러분들도 아직 밥도 안 먹고 지금까지 듣고 있는 이유가 여기 지금 관심이 있으신 거잖아요. 네. 오늘 라이브 질문 20개인데 다 못해요. 이거 지금 끝났어요. 예, 그래서 제가 시간도 10분이나 지났네. 10분 정도 더 뜰까 생각했는데 딱 맞췄네요. 네. 여러분들 오늘 너무 감사드리고요. 예, 오늘 발표자님들 너무 채팅창에 지금 남아있는 300분, 예, 예, 저기 300분이 넘네. 330분. 예. 한번, 예, 박수 한번 쳐주시고, 예, 발표자님 너무 진짜 감사합니다. 그리고 아까 질문에 저 QR코드, 예, 필요하신 분, QR코드 제가 띄워놓을 거고요. 아, 그거 안 했네요. 예, 저 요 굿즈 받으실 분, 예, 굿즈 받으실 분 제가 요 굿즈 받으실 분 선정을 드리겠습니다. 누구, 어떤 걸까요? 예. 누굴까요? 일단 저는 요거 웹 개발자한테 충고 어드바이스 하는 네, 요 코드, 예, 코딩 KJY님 하고, 그다음에 예, 윤성원님이 엄청 질문, 예, 많이 했고요. 파인튜닝 관련돼서 요거, 예, 괜찮아서 S보트님 맞죠? 예, 윤성원님하고, 그리고 아까 황민호님, 그죠? 황민호님 또 요거 알파카 관련돼서 또 다른 모델 말씀해 주신 거, 저희가 인사이트를 많이 줘서 대화의 기회를 주신 분, 네, 요렇게 세 분 드릴까요? 예, 이렇게 저한테 devotion@sk.com, devotion@sk.com, 예, devotion@sk.com으로, 예, 오늘 이벤트 당첨됐다고 말씀 주시면 제가, 예, 굿즈 보내드리도록 하겠습니다. 황민노님, 그다음에 다시 한번 말씀드리면, 예, 윤성원님, 네, 그다음에, 예, 여기 코딩 KJY님 세 분, 예, 축하드립니다. 네. 아, 더 드릴까요? 아, 더 드리고 싶은데 여기, 아, 더 드릴게요. 제가 오늘 사람들 많이 와서, 예, 여기 김경희님까지 드릴게요. 김경희님, 예, 김경희님 학생하는 선생님이신데, 예, 예, 질문 너무 좋아서 요거 김경희님, 그리고 마지막에, 예, 요 루시아님, 예, 필요하신가요? 혹시 해외분이면, 해외로 배송이 안 돼서 해외분이면 말씀 주시고요. 플러그인 관련된 화두 해주신, 질문해 주실 분까지 해서 5분 드릴게요. 네, 갑자기 제가 즉석해서 더 드립니다. 아, 지금 점심 먹으러 가셔야 되죠? 저도 지금, 예, 정신이 없는데, 저는 이런 생각을 했어요. 오늘 세미나 들으면서 어떤 생각이 했냐면, 오늘 번역 이거 처음 했잖아요. 이 통역조차도, 이 통역자분들한테는 조금 죄송하지만, 예, 이것도 지금 제가 이렇게 한국말로 한 거를 GPT가 엄청 잘 이제 학습을 하거나 해서, 이렇게 실시간 통역이 앞으로, 예, 인공지능 AI가 할 수 있는 시대가 오지 않을까. 그러면 아까 질문하신 분 중 하나 있는데 HRD 영역에서도, 예, 이런 게 엄청나게 활용이 되지 않을까 하는 생각을 또 해봤어요. 예. 맞죠? 아닌가요? 챗GPT 항상 관심에 두고, 이제 생활을 해야 되지 않을까. 앞으로의 새로운 패러다임, 예, 아이폰이 나온 것처럼 뭔가, 예, 큰 변화가 생길 것 같은 느낌이 들어서, 예, 오늘 세미나 준비했고, 여러분들 많이 와주셔서 질문 많이 해주시고 답변 주셔서 감사합니다. 오늘 테크 세미나는 이것으로 마치도록 하겠습니다. 여러분 감사합니다. 예, 감사합니다. 콜드 앤 토니, 나이스 투 미트 유. 이제 영어 처음 해. 감사합니다. 네, 저희 이제 녹화는 중지하겠습니다. 네.